Women are nothing but machines for producing children. Napoleon Bonaparte. A harsh, bitter statement, as if he deeply despised women. But no, these weren't spiteful words from an enemy. Rather, they were the cold observations of a man who had once loved deeply and felt profoundly betrayed. Napoleon had once loved fiercely, sincerely, almost desperately. His letters to Josephine still exist, filled with passion, trembling intensity, and even desperation. In each word, he's not the conqueror ruling half of Europe, but simply a man, stripped bare by his longing for love and his desire to hold on to the woman he cherished. But while he was building an empire, she was losing herself in the arms of another. While he fought bravely on the front lines, she toyed with another man's heart back home. Amidst gunfire, battle maps, and dreams of conquest, Napoleon realized a harsh truth. Not every woman wants a great man. Many even fear greatness, because greatness refuses to be tamed. It doesn't quietly sit down, gently ask how your day went, or send flowers every morning. It cannot be held down by hugs or sweet, "I miss you" texts. Greatness is like a wildfire. It consumes everything in its path, including the peacefulness love often demands. From this bitter disappointment, Napoleon started viewing women differently. No longer romantically, no longer poetically, but through the lens of someone who had finally understood the rules of the game. When he said, "Women are nothing but machines for producing children," he wasn't just insulting them. He was distilling his conclusion that most women, in his eyes, couldn't understand the storm raging within the heart of a man driven by destiny. To him, most women never transcended their biological role. They didn't grasp those sleepless nights dedicated to strategy, nor the years of ridicule for dreaming too big. They didn't understand the profound loneliness of a man forced to keep moving forward when the world just wished he would stop and be a bit more agreeable. They saw only the results, the throne, the maps, the victories, but not the price paid in blood, sweat, and loss. And when they realized that his battle would never end, they began to resent the very flame they'd initially admired. So, they withdrew. They returned to men who were easier to love, men who weren't burdened by great missions or grand legacies, men who were always available, gentle, always there with open arms when needed, men whose entire identity revolved around her. An ordinary man doesn't threaten stability, doesn't provoke challenging thoughts, doesn't fight for anything larger than himself. He's simply there, soft, dependable, and reassuringly predictable. And that's precisely what makes him attractive, not because he's extraordinary, but because there's nothing intimidating about him. Napoleon understood this very early. He stopped trying to be loved. He no longer sought acceptance. Instead, he had only one goal left: to conquer the truth, no matter how brutal it might be. And the truth is this: the higher a man climbs, the more he must learn to walk alone. Not because he doesn't need anyone, but because comfort, warmth, and dependence can't accompany greatness on its journey. We live in a world that pretends to celebrate excellence, but only when it's comfortable, relatable, and pleasant. We cheer for extraordinary men, but only until they make us feel small. The moment they begin to challenge our sense of security, we turn our backs. Napoleon knew this. He wasn't resented merely for his power, but because he refused to kneel. Greatness makes people uncomfortable, not because it's evil, but because it can't be controlled. Napoleon once wrote burning love letters, not with the words of an emperor, but with the raw heart of a man deeply in love. In those letters to Josephine, there was no trace of the celebrated conqueror, no coldness of a strategic mastermind, just a man pleading desperately, hoping she wouldn't betray him. Yet she did. Napoleon conquered an entire continent, yet he couldn't keep the heart of one woman. And perhaps at that moment, Napoleon grasped a cruel truth. Power may change history, but it can't hold a woman's heart. It wasn't that he lacked passion or love. It was simply because he couldn't give her what women ultimately desire more than power: stability. The greater a man becomes, the more he intimidates others, especially in love. He's unpredictable, difficult to control, and won't always pause to comfort her every time she feels empty. He's always reaching for something bigger than himself. And for many people, that's not romantic, it's threatening. A woman may admire an extraordinary man from afar, but living with him is an entirely different story. Eventually, she may begin to feel small, unneeded, and no longer the center of attention. And when she's no longer at the center, she starts to withdraw. She seeks out men who are easier to love, men who are grateful simply for being allowed to stay. These men don't ask tough questions, don't challenge her mind, and don't vanish into their work or obsess about the future. They're always available, always attentive, always prioritizing her emotions. It's exactly their gentle submissiveness that makes them appealing, not because they're strong, but because they're safe. They don't threaten her sense of stability. They don't force her to reflect deeply or to grow. But the great man is different. He doesn't revolve around a woman. He revolves around an ideal. And that ideal isn't found in the kitchen or in a cozy bed. It's located much higher, in a place he himself sometimes fears stepping into. Yet he goes there anyway, because if he doesn't, he's no longer himself. And it's exactly this pursuit that makes him incompatible with the foundation of modern relationships: comfort. Napoleon Bonaparte lived this paradox. A man capable of commanding armies and shaping the fate of nations was labeled cold, distant, and overly focused. But ask yourself this: how could someone carve his name into history if all he ever did was sit and whisper sweet words? A man like him doesn't aim to become the ideal lover. He aims to become someone the world must bow down to. And in that transformation, he becomes less of a partner and more of a force, a storm, a command. So eventually, she leaves. Not because he did anything wrong, but because he wasn't gentle enough at the right moments, wasn't sweet enough often enough, and didn't make her feel like his top priority. He gave all his time, intellect, and even his soul to his vision, only to return home and find himself resented for exactly that. Not appreciated, not admired, but blamed, because his greatness forced others to confront their own mediocrity. Napoleon knew it. You know it. And every man who's ever been abandoned while building something bigger than himself knows it too. The truth is, most women don't choose men who can lead them to greatness. They choose men who make them feel safe standing still. The real question isn't, why didn't she choose you? It's, do you want to build a legacy, or do you want to hold someone's hand? Because most people will always choose comfort. But you're fire, and fire isn't meant to be a place of rest. There's a certain kind of silence only understood by men who've journeyed through the depths required by greatness. It's not indifference or coldness. It's the silence born from thousands of sleepless nights, years of ridicule, misunderstanding, and isolation in pursuit of their vision. It's the silence of inner battles that no one sees, battles fought by those who chose discipline over comfort. At some point, you realize the world doesn't reward your focus. It labels it distance. It doesn't understand ambition. It calls it arrogance. Your silence isn't seen as resilience. It's labeled as indifference. Napoleon understood this better than anyone. He wasn't born to please others. He was born to lead, to shape, to conquer. And men like him never fit into the emotional scripts society writes today. They don't send flowers every evening or text sweet messages every hour. They're not here to be loved. They're here to accomplish their mission. Napoleon didn't hate women. He simply saw a truth most modern men still fear to acknowledge, that what women say they want often differs from what they actually choose. She may admire a great man in theory, but when it comes to choosing, she'll choose the one who makes her feel safe. Choosing a home built from gentleness rather than demand. Choosing sweet compliance over fierce vision. And then, men like Napoleon, those who've walked through blood, sweat, and tears to build their empires, come home only to be left behind by the same woman who once said, "I'll love you forever." Why? Because love without understanding is just a countdown timer to heartbreak. She once admired the fire within him, but as he continued to climb higher, as that flame refused to die and instead burned brighter, she began to resent it. Because that fire burned away what she called peace. And so, a man who chooses glory must also accept loneliness. You can have her heart, or you can have the world, but you can never have both. There are men who choose the path of greatness, not because they crave applause or want to stand out, but because they simply can't live any other way. Within them burns a fire, an inner calling impossible to ignore, guiding them away from comfort zones and into territory few dare to enter, the road of purpose. But what they don't realize, or perhaps do realize yet continue forward, is the price. A price few have the courage to pay: loneliness. Napoleon didn't choose loneliness. He simply pursued a vision so immense, so different, that no one else could keep up. He didn't push others away. Instead, it was his journey, the heights he reached, that made it impossible for others to breathe the same air he inhaled every day. The world claims to want strong men, but only if they remain gentle, thoughtful, considerate, and softly approachable when needed. Women want to be seen, heard, and embraced by a man burning from within with ambition, but he rarely has the time to stop and tend to every fragile emotion. He's not cold, he's focused. He's not heartless, he's carrying something greater than himself. He's not withdrawn. It's just that nobody speaks the language of someone who's busy writing history. That's the truth modern society doesn't want to admit. People aren't afraid of villains. They're afraid of greatness. Not because greatness is toxic, but because it cannot be tamed, predicted, or possessed. You can't cage a man whose purpose transcends love itself. As a result, he's labeled as distant, uncaring, difficult to connect with. Of course, he's not listening. He's busy listening to the voice of destiny. Napoleon was criticized for his ambition, his conquests, and his massive ego. But deep down, what he was truly punished for was his refusal to bow down to love, tradition, or the comfortable roles society reserves for ordinary men. Eventually, he realized a brutal truth. Even emperors can be abandoned by the people they fought hardest to protect. Even lions can die alone. Why? Because the world genuinely loves only those men who know when to stop. Men who don't burn too brightly, delve too deeply, or climb too high. Men who are good enough, making nobody feel small. Here's the harsh truth no one wants to say aloud. A man must choose. Either build an empire or build a family. One offers legacy, the other warmth, but rarely both. The ordinary man will be loved, praised, and remembered fondly, but only the lonely, misunderstood, and abandoned ones carve their names into history. So, if you're chasing truth, greatness, or immortality, brace yourself. You won't be loved in the way the world typically loves. You'll be doubted, left behind, and labeled dangerous. But that's exactly because you are. Never forget this. The world always bows before what it fears most. Maybe you're still wondering, why? Why would a woman turn her back on a disciplined, visionary, steadfast man who could change the world just by being himself? Why would she reject a storm only to chase after a gentle breeze that barely shakes the leaves? The answer isn't in the words she says, but in the truth she never dares admit. A great man is a mirror, and in that mirror, everything she lacks becomes painfully clear. His ambition reveals her laziness. His silence exposes her insecurity. His emotional independence highlights the dependence she tries so hard to hide. Standing before that mirror, most people cannot bear their own reflection. So instead of stepping forward, she steps back. Not because he's wrong, but because his presence forces her to grow. And most people don't truly want to grow. They're not looking for a man who will push them to change. They seek comfort. A great man doesn't need love to survive. He doesn't live for approval, doesn't require reassurance, and isn't afraid of solitude. And this isn't romantic, it's threatening. Because when a man doesn't need you to stand strong, you can't control him. You can't hold him with tears. You can't shape him to your desires. You have only two choices: follow or be left behind. And most women don't want that gamble. They crave security, not challenge. They don't openly admit this, but most women don't choose men based purely on admiration. They choose based on emotional leverage. A man they can shape, a man who stops when she cries, a man willing to put his own life on pause to make her feel like the center of his universe, a man who never pushes her out of her comfort zone. But a great man doesn't pause, doesn't orbit anyone. He builds, he bleeds for something bigger than love, not because he's heartless, but because his heart is forged in discipline. Not because he can't love, but because love isn't his ultimate mission. And that's exactly why he's out of reach for most women. Because she doesn't truly want a god. She wants someone who stays, listens to her stories, holds her hand through the winter, and places her above everything else. This is the quiet yet common reason why many women elevate their appearances while lowering their standards beneath the surface. They choose men who look strong, speak confidently, and seem charismatic. But deep inside, these men are soft, pliable, easy to mold, and even easier to keep around. Such a man never makes her feel small, but he also never pushes her to grow. He never threatens her comfort zone, but he never truly earns her respect either. She'll love him, but she'll never truly admire him. She'll live with him, but she'll never truly follow him because he doesn't lead. He simply exists, afraid of being left behind. She'll love him, hold him tight on cold nights, and talk about him to her friends with sparkling eyes. She may marry him, build a home with him, have children with him, but there's one thing she'll never do: admire him. Because deep inside, she knows she didn't choose a king. She chose a servant dressed in a king's armor. He may say strong words, pretend to be busy, and imitate masculine principles learned from social media. But ultimately, he is shaped by the need to be accepted, driven by the fear of abandonment. And then there's you, the man who doesn't need acceptance, who doesn't pause to negotiate feelings, who burns with ambition at 2 a.m, building something no one else yet sees. You're a different breed. Your presence alone forces those around you to either step up or step away. You aren't rejected because of flaws. You're rejected because of the fire within you, because of the intensity of your spirit, because you don't ask permission to exist. You exist as a truth that others cannot avoid. And truth is rarely comfortable. It's not sweet, not easy to love. Truth is exhausting. It forces people to confront themselves, and most aren't ready for that. They don't want to rise, they want rest. And when they meet someone like you, someone who doesn't know how to rest, they choose to retreat. So don't envy the ordinary man. Instead, pity him. Because even though he may be loved, praised, and comforted, he'll never truly be respected. He'll never be needed in a way that shakes a woman's soul. He'll be used, kept around, but never truly followed, because there's nothing in him worth following. And you, my brother, you were never born to be loved like everyone else. Your life is a storm, not a gentle melody. Your path is steep, not a velvet carpet. Your reward doesn't come from comfort. It comes from conquest. Not the conquest of others, but of yourself. Loneliness, silence, late-night doubts, whispers in the dark telling you to give up, to be more lovable, to soften up. These are your tests. Don't abandon who you are. Instead, abandon her. Abandon the illusion that someday someone will fully understand you. Someone who won't panic at the depth in your eyes, who won't run when you're too focused, too quiet, too intense. You weren't born to live comfortably in the warmth of a woman's embrace. You were born to fulfill the mission of a man, and yes, that comes at a price. You'll be lonely, misunderstood, and you might even die without your heart ever experiencing true love. But if you remain steadfast, if you endure, then the world will never forget your name. Because ultimately, it's not women who build monuments. It's not women who rewrite history. It's not women who lead armies into battle or transform visions into reality. Men do that. And they do it alone, bleeding, focused, unloved, but unstoppable. So don't ask yourself why she didn't choose you. You already know the answer. She didn't choose greatness. She chose comfort,